Okay. So fire away. Yeah. So she's level 10.
Yeah, and then we've just started doing some jumping activities, like just on a reformer,
Yeah.
Pilates reformer. So we've began with that, and so I'm kind of just curious to get your opinion on like when to progress with
Yeah.
like regular jumping and what else to do with that.
Yep. How did she tear it? Did she tear it on like floor, vault? Was it on a takeoff? Do you know like how gymnastics, like tumbling and stuff like that works?
So I am familiar with that, and what she was doing was she was practicing. She was at a meet and she
Yeah.
was warming up, and that's
Okay.
when she tore it. So I'm assuming it was on beam, but I can double check and find out.
Yeah. So usually most of them are on tumbling on floor. And the only reason I say that is because if they tear it more on floor, versus like something more like traumatic, right? Like, well, floor is traumatic, but like a fall accident, right? They fall off and they hyperextend their foot. Usually
Yeah.
the mechanism of somebody who is tumbling is more progressive onset. And so it's harder to get back to those things. And you have to have a conversation about like, what skills do you want to get back to? Like, are you going to change your tumbling passes? Because, for example, there's a skill called the double layout, which is very intense, but a lot of athletes try to get there, or another one called the full in. And if they're going to change their tumbling passes and not go back to that really high intense backwards tumbling, and they're going to
Yeah.
change their tumbling forward, it changes how the end stage of their rehab might be a little bit, because you're not as worried about getting back to that like really hardcore stuff. And you can still obviously train those high level plyometrics, but I would definitely have a conversation with her about how she tore on what skill and if she's planning on going back to those skills, because that's really important. But it's regardless of, you know.
Yeah. So I
Um,
think her goal is to return back, but I don't know if the intensity is going to be as high.
yeah,
And I know she did mention that she did have pain on her that same leg 2 weeks prior, and so
yeah,
that's when it kind of began. So I think she had some sort of pathology there prior.
yeah. Did she have pain in her Achilles or in her calf? Like, is it a calf strain, or was it more like her
I
Achilles
think
or
it was
something?
her Achilles because she said that she felt it with landing, and then she
Yeah,
had a
common.
meet and she just tried to,
Yeah,
um, yeah,
push through.
yeah,
Yeah, the three that I'm treating right now or have treated this year were all similar. They had some like soreness in their Achilles or calf before, end of the year, big meet coming up, and like kind of push through. But how old is she or he? She
17.
17, nice. And then does she want to go to college?
Yeah, so she's planning on starting school in September.
Okay, and is she already? She's going to be a senior, or it's going to be a freshman somewhere?
She's gonna be a freshman.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and so how far out from the surgery is she now?
She's 15 weeks out.
Oh, nice, sweet. So is that a little over 4 months or something like that?
Little over 4 months.
Yeah,
Yeah, is that four?
I think
That's
so.
3.5-ish.
Well, yeah, 3.5, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the surgeons here in Boston usually recommend that a couple things. One is that obviously they have full normalized gait. They're able to do a repeated single leg heel raise pretty consistently before you start any plyos stuff, which I totally agree with. I think the research is pretty
Yeah.
supportive of that. So I would check that first to see if she can do repeated single leg heel raises and not have symptoms. But that being said, I think personally, a lot of people, myself included as a mistake, usually jump to plyos a little too early and too fast before building up soleus like capacity of like strength. So we actually usually chase for a month or so from like 3 to 4 whenever they're cleared by their surgeon for more, is to do like a lot of faceted calf strengthening, right? So seated single leg calf raises first on the floor with a dumbbell on their knee, and then starting to maybe elevate their toes up 2 inches, because it replicates the eccentric load to end range with the deficit. And I think a lot of gymnasts don't train that last eccentric overload end range of motion, which is how they tore it in the first place. So I
Mhm.
think because they lack the strength at end range and the capacity for that, sometimes when they do their plyos, they get a little bit more aggressive with the depth and it causes some symptoms. So that would
Yeah.
be something I chase for sure, is like seated calf raises, high tiptoe dumbbell walks. With dumbbells in their hands or a weight vest on or something like that is very, very important. Single leg calf raises for sure, as much as she feels comfortable, but as much like for like 2 or 3 weeks as you can do of like really high level strength. If you haven't already, maybe you've done it, but I would
Yeah.
definitely do that for like 3 to 4 weeks before she starts even doing double leg jumping.
Yeah, she's doing a lot of heel
Oh,
raises.
nice. You're
Yeah,
crushing.
that's like the main thing I've been like making her do. And then we've incorporated some, obviously hip strengthening, quad
Yep.
strengthening, hamstring strengthening, all of that.
Nice.
So,
You're on fire. You're halfway there.
but I like the walking with the dumbbells. I haven't
Yeah.
tried that.
the high tiptoe, they call it releve gymnastics, like dance terms and stuff, but that really high end range tiptoe position. It's one thing to do double leg and single leg calf raises to that end range and hold it, but they really need a lot of endurance and a lot of like repeat use of that, because they pretty much walk up on toe like all the time on beam and on floor and stuff. So like that end range gastroc strength is really important, along with the end range, obviously soleus strength the other way. And I think the tendon responds. I mean, there's mixed reviews, right, on whether like that stuff has a mechanotransductive effect to really get collagen change, or how much of that's happening. But I just kind of err on the side of caution of like, let's just do it all and make sure you're safe.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I would do that.
Target all around.
Exactly. Yeah. And it sounds like you're halfway there, but in terms of like actual plyo progressions, right? So I've always taken more of the strength conditioning approach to plyos, whereas if you look at someone who's like Lee Taft, for example, or other people who are like sprinting coaches or trying to do that, they follow more of a progression of like double to single leg to explosive single leg, and then like a linear to multi-directional, and then obviously a low to medium to high impact. So I usually always start people out with two-legged in place, and then really no high demand, very low level. So we usually start with pogo hops, which are just like two-legged, very tiny bunny hops, pogo hops, in and out hops, and then scissor hops front to back. And we count the ground contact. So if we do like 20, 20, 20, right? 60 a few days per week, plus a bunch like skipping and shuffling and karaoke and stuff. That's usually where we start first, is just very basic running, right? Just forward through cones, not backwards or change of direction, side to side. So it's usually plyo hops, in and out hops, scissor hops, jogging lightly forward at like a 50%, side to side karaoke, skipping, all that kind of stuff. And then once that goes well, we progress every 2 weeks, and then we start just doing more aggressive on like the height of the pogo hop, scissor hop, stuff like that. We start adding broad jumps, mini broad jumps, and mini two-legged jumps. Like they'll jump forward and then jump up and down in place, jump forward, jump up and down in place. They'll do that side to side. So like jump in place, stick, jump in place, stick, jump in place, stick, no rebounding. Usually box jumps are in that 4th week, like they only jump up and step down. So there's no drop in absorption.
So like 4th week from when you do initiate like ground jumping, like double leg.
So like where you are now, right? 14.
So where I am. Perfect.
Yeah,
okay.
12 or 14 to like 16 weeks, which is usually like, for us, it's usually like 2 months of damage control, 2 months of being normal human again, 2 months of being an athlete again, and then 2 months of being like a gymnast again. So usually like months 4 to 6 is usually when they're doing more. And some people are faster, but I go slower with gymnastics because it's so high intensity. Yeah, you could get back in 6 months, but I don't think it's worth the risk, especially if they're going to college and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree.
So so I think those middle 2 to 4 weeks is like box jumps up, step downs, start doing hurdle hops. Like we do hurdle hop and stick over low hurdles, and higher ones as well when they get more comfortable. And then usually
it seems like they go from like not doing any jumping stuff to like fairly quickly. So I just like don't know, because I obviously don't learn this in school, where it's like how fast do you progress someone, and it's like is that going to compromise their tendon and all of that. So like
unfortunately there's not a lot of literature on end stage Achilles repair rehab at all, let alone a gymnast or whatever it is. There's some like case reports and stuff like that, but there's really no like advanced strength and conditioning protocols like we have for ACL or for like Tommy John and stuff like that. So yeah, I won't lie, like with the 5 or 10 that I've had in the last few years, me and my coworker Dan, who like treat a lot of these things, we're kind of like, it's the Wild West a little bit, you know, like I hope this works. Like the first time they do hurdle hops or more ballistic stuff around like 6 weeks of plyos, I'm like, I hope this goes well. That's why you have to just try to follow the force loading curve of like a seated calf raise, right? If they can do a very slow eccentric overload with like, this girl is like a level 10, she's a junior going to senior, and she does sets of 10 eccentrically with this 80-pound dumbbell on her calf in a deficit for like 4 weeks. I'm feeling okay that she can tolerate like some low level plyometrics and feel fine. And running felt fine to her, you know, little bounces felt fine. But when you get to that 3rd stage, which is like after the box jumps, after all the linear stuff, you speed up running. When you start getting into like bounding plyometrics, right? So like we would start doing single leg jump and land in those same directions at the same time while doing double leg starting to bound together, because obviously the single leg force is high, but the double leg bouncing is more plyometric and more phase. But the research we have in gymnastics right now is like 15.5 to 18.5 times body weight and shearing forces on the Achilles tendon. So that's why we go so slow and go so like in the elongated period. So we start with single leg bound and stick, start to box jump up, box jump down, and just start with increasing the heights. Double leg bounding in place, so bunny hops down a row, side to side hops in place. You can put 3 hurdles out and go like front, side, back. It's pretty good. And then usually we start low depth jumps down there too, once they feel comfortable with the drop. So like drop down, jump and stick on 2 legs. So that takes all 2 weeks to kind of get ramped up. Running and sprinting becomes more like put 4 cones out 10 meters apart, like sprint, back pedal, sprint, back pedal, being careful on the back pedal, obviously, and like the stop plant reverse. So we do that for 2 weeks. And then the hardest thing we get them to, which is what I did, was 8 weeks of plyometrics and advanced strength before she got into basic gymnastics on tumble track and the softer surfaces. So I think she was at like 5.5 months maybe, was pretty aggressive depth jumps off that way, a single leg bounding either in place or over hurdles, like just jump in place repeatedly a couple times. Obviously sprinting and change of direction, stuff like that. And then multi-directional depth jump. So like drop off the box to 1, jump to 1 sideways. But that was probably way out into like the 5-6 month mark. And then as I made her a program to go back to gymnastics, we just kind of dialed them this way, right? So more gymnastics, a little bit less of the actual plyos, and more of just the strength maintenance care and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. How about like double leg jumping off and then landing on 1 leg? Like, did you ever incorporate that? Because that's obviously similar to the force that they feel.
Yeah. So usually when they're doing double leg depth jumps, I usually progress to single leg off a lower box to a single leg plant and land. So if she's doing like a 12-inch depth jumps with 2 legs, she could probably do a 6-inch jump down to single leg, like on the way back. So like depth jumped on 12 and then on the way back do a 6-inch drop off and stick and landing more for balance. We do a lot of dynamic stability stuff too. So like single leg RDLs on a cone, or, tossing and catching with that, or doing single leg RDLs with a kettlebell for more like the hip dynamic control. But I would say,
and the balance, because that's definitely off.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Balance being a big issue, but then also like you could make the argument that less hip control causes more medial torsion force rotationally on the medial Achilles. And I think most gymnasts probably tear medial to laterally. So like that kind of control is probably super important. But yeah, those 3 categories of like strength, balance, dynamic stability, and like, ballistic control are kind of the 3 buckets you're trying to manage.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And then when they get completely cleared by a doctor around like 5 or 6 months, usually to get back, it's hard if you're not a gymnastics coach, you understand, but essentially I would say make a list of all the skills she wants to get back to, like for floor vault or whatever. And you have to like kind of dose those a little bit. So maybe working with her coach is probably better for that. But I always make a program that's like a grid, and it says like, okay, how many days per week do you work out? 3 days a week, we're going to do loading days. And then on the in-between days, we're going to give you 24 to 48 hours to like not really load as intensely. They can do bars or other stuff, because I think there's some good research from, I think it's Kyle Docking and Joe Cook that say like, you might need 24 to 48 hours for collagen net synthesis to remodel. So you want to give them a little bit of time. I think too many people just dive back into like all the impact 5 days a week, and it blows them up. Not that they tear their Achilles, but they just get like Achilles tendinopathy,
Okay. Or the other limb becomes involved.
Yeah, right. Exactly. They start to get sore on the other side.
Yeah. Okay. That was one of the questions I wanted about dosing and like how often they should be working on strengthening, and then also doing sports specific skills.
I usually start with 2 days per week of loading the Achilles in a gymnastic specific format, while they're still doing 1 day a week per maintenance care with me, and then a home program. So it's usually like, they can do their home program at the gym when they either can't do an impact event or they're running out of things to do. So I usually start them with that, and then see them once a week for maintenance care, once every other week if it's fine, just to make sure it's going well. The program, it's more about, I'm more about like load management, kind of like helping them guide. I'm not actually treating them a ton. I'm doing a little bit of manual therapy and a little bit of like, testing new plows if they need it, but it's more about, okay, what skills are we going to do? Like, how do we progress from like the tumble track trampoline to like what's called a rod floor, which is like not as hard as the regular floor, but not as soft as mini tramp. So like slowly going through that over the course of a few weeks while they do their own home program usually goes pretty well. And I've had most people get back. I've had one who like had some Achilles tendinopathy and had to pull back a little bit because I think she was just too excited and like went too fast. But all the other ones I've treated with or consulted with over the course of a conservative 6 to 7 months were able to get back to the majority of all their skills. And they just took out that one big tumbling pass that they were going to try to do for college, the double layout or full in. And most, knock on wood, have done fine, in the long term.
Yeah, a lot. I watched her videos, and a lot of her skills are like back bends and backwards tumbling. So a lot of eccentric Achilles.
Yeah. It's hard because if they can get away with it, changing one pass of backwards to forwards in their floor routine is usually a huge, change it, because they're ranked by skills you need to do. But some people are not as good as the forward things as backwards. So if she can use the time to learn a pass that's forward, she's going to take off probably thousands of impacts on her college career by not doing, because they have to compete back-to-back weekends all the time, especially if she's level 10, maybe going like Division 1 or something. They have like multiple weekends in a row. They have to do those really hard backwards tumbling passes. And we're running a research study right now for risk factors. And we think that that's a big risk factor, is someone who has to go from a high school situation to a college situation where they're competing back-to-back weekends with these really hard passes.
Yeah. It's a lot of impact.
I know it's bad. There was like 40 in the first, or 25 to 40 in the first like 2 months of college season this year, which was terrible.
Oh man. Okay.
Yeah, it's bad. It's not I could. But yeah, so if there's anything else you need, just email me or whatever. But there's, I have like a podcast with Jill Cook that was pretty helpful. And then,
I listened to that.
oh, cool. The blog post too is like super geeky, but if you're into the research stuff or something.
Well, yeah, I was obviously looking for some stuff online, and it's surprising how there's like very, very little stuff out there. Yeah. I had a question about like incorporating some of the stuff that we have in our clinic, like a trampoline. Like we have just one of those rebounder trampolines, and then we also have like one of those AirX balance beam things. Like if I wanted to incorporate those things, like what are some like ideas that you have?
Yeah, so I would just, after the normal ground progression goes for like the low impact stuff, you could probably start adding in some tumble track stuff and testing the waters of how they feel on, it's obviously way more range of motion, right? But it's a softer intensity. So they could do that as part of their warm up. They could just do their bounces in place, then hop on the trampoline and do like 2 foot, 1 leg, 2 foot quarter turns, 1 leg quarter turns, all that stuff would be fine. Same thing with the air track. You know, she could easily do some jumps, like her regular balance beam or floor jumps. She might be able to try there. Like they do things called switch leaps and tuck halves, tuck fulls, whatever her jumps and leaps are. She could try to play around with those first on a softer surface like that. I usually have them do it on tumble track anyways at the actual facility they're working at. But if you would like to learn more about like what it looks like and how they land and dynamic control on a single leg, that might be good. It's very hard to land with the same control that you would on a softer surface, like a trampoline or something like that. So, but it might be a really good way to kind of have a different exposure to something she's going to do down the road and make sure she doesn't have symptoms during it, or more importantly, like the next day that she doesn't have symptoms. More of them they feel fine during it. And then like the next day they wake up and they're like, oh man, it's kind of sore. Like, okay, maybe we pushed a little bit too much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then like the other thing is like how like fairly can I give her like the go for like, okay, you can go return back to doing this skill. You can start doing a handstand, or, you know, like a powerful handstand and tumbling back and things like that.
Yeah, usually everything I say, I always try to have them progress through like a 3-day cycle, whereas they try something new on like a Monday and they don't do anything the next day. Because I always tell them they shouldn't have more than a 3 out of 10 discomfort while they're doing it, and it shouldn't get worse the next day. And I think there was a study in BJSM on like shoulder cuff pathology that came from, so it's not with Achilles, but that's a good rule of thumb for like, there's going to be a little bit of soreness for sure, right? But if it's no worse the day after, then it was okay, and you can kind of maybe push a little bit. But I usually do something the same for a whole week, right? So if like we try 5 new skills, or we're tumbling on tumble track for a half hour or whatever, and she's not worse during it, she's not worse after, I would do that again, probably a second time that week, make sure it's okay. And then if that goes well, the next week, maybe add in a 3rd session of that, or keep it to 2 sessions, but add in a couple more skills that are harder. And then usually every 2 weeks I progress people. So like 2 weeks of tumble track and soft and like lighter loading, and then 2 weeks of the moderate rod strip or something else like that, and then a little bit harder skills. But they can start doing like basic skills on the harder surface, but then harder skills on the softer surface, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so a little bit of a balance.
Yeah, exactly. Because they want to do more of the fun stuff and they want to test the water. So you can give them like, all right, go to the harder surface, do like 15 to 20 minute warm up, do a half hour of some stuff, but then end for 15 minutes on the tumble track and do your harder passes. And then you just kind of bump the next things up. So it's like, okay, do your basics on the floor, week 6 to week 8, but then go back to the rod strip or the tumble track and do like the harder stuff you're trying to get back to. And it's a variety of stresses on the Achilles, but it also, I think psychologically for them is really helpful to like, oh, I'm getting back.
I'm getting there. Yeah.
Versus being like, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile and they'll start doing like double backs on like harder surfaces. And that's when things kind of get into hot water.
Yeah.
Yep. Same thing with dismounts off bars, dismounts off beam. It's like softer surfaces, more chill for a couple of weeks, and then slowly add up more and more. They can't use pits because of coronavirus right now, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But, that's usually like a main thing that we used to get back earlier. But just a mat in the pit, they can just roll out of their tumbling passes is fine.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. Anything else?
Let me see. No, I think you kind of answered pretty much everything I had. Yeah.
Sweet.
Cool.
Okay. Yeah. If anything comes up, or if like no problem. If you get sore, if like the conversation about tumbling passes and stuff is like way too boring or overwhelming for you, just email me and I'll connect you like with me and give a program for her coach and you guys to kind of follow that I would make for some of the other 10s that we did.
Sure. I would love that.
Cool. Sounds good.
Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Yeah, it's no problem at all. Happy to help.
You too. Have a good one.